He was a doctor, an explorer, and a missionary. A man whose name became synonymous with courage, discovery, and unshakable faith. In the heart of the 19th century, while the world was changing rapidly, one man set out to chart the unknown, and in doing so, changed history. This is the story of David Livingstone. From the factories of Scotland to the vast landscapes of Africa, Livingstone's journey was not just one of miles and maps, but of purpose and perseverance. In this series, we're going to retrace his footsteps and explore the legacy he left behind, a legacy of compassion, of courage, and of Christ. So join us as we step into the life of a man who dared to go where few had gone before, and whose story still inspires us today. My own inclination would lead me to say as little as possible about myself, but several friends in whose judgment I have confidence have suggested that, as the reader likes to know something about the author, a short account of his origin and early life would lend additional interest to this book. Such is my excuse for the following egotism, and if an apology be necessary for giving a genealogy, I find it in the fact that it is not very long and contains only one incident, of which I have reason to be proud. To truly understand the man he became, we must first return to the beginning, his childhood in Scotland, the influence of his parents, and the formative experiences that shaped his early life. We will explore David Livingstone's early years through his own recollections, as well as through the accounts of those who lived closer to his time, people who wrote of the boy who would grow to become one of the most well-known missionaries the world has ever known. Author Sylvester Horne thus describes the time in which Livingstone was born. The year 1813, in which my story opens, was a momentous one in the history of Europe. The titanic struggle with Napoleon was nearing its crisis. Victor at Lutzen and Botzen, he had been defeated at Leipzig, on one of the bloodiest battlefields in modern war. Away in the Pyrenees, Wellington was grappling with Soule, and step by step driving him back onto French soil. Among those who were fighting in the ranks of the British Army were at least two men bearing the name of Livingstone. It is doubtful whether they even heard, amid the excitement and peril of the time, that away in peaceful Blantyre, and in their brother Neil's home, a lad had been born, and christened by the good, sound, scriptural name of David. Yet it may come to be believed some day that the birth of David Livingstone was of more vital influence upon the destiny of the world, even than the battle in which Napoleon's star set in blood 2 years later. For to open up a continent and lead the way in the Christianization of its countless millions was one of the most renowned victories of peace, a more difficult and notable achievement than to overthrow one form of military domination in Europe. The family of Livingstone came from the island of Ulva, off the coast of Argyllshire. Not much of interest is known about them, except that one of them died at Culloden, fighting for the Stuarts. This being the one incident of which Livingstone had reason to be proud of his family's name and history. David's father, Neil, settled in Blantyre as a dealer in tea. He had been previously apprenticed to a David Hunter, a tailor, and as many a good prentice has done before him, married his master's daughter. Neil Livingstone and his brave wife had a hard fight of it to make a living out of a small tea business and to educate and rear their children. 2 of the children died in infancy, but 3 sons and 2 daughters grew up in that humble home. David was the second son. David says of his father, though too conscientious ever to become rich as a small tea dealer, by his kindliness of manner and winning ways, he made the heartstrings of his children twine about him, as firmly as if he had possessed and could have bestowed upon them every worldly advantage. He reared his children in connection with the Kirk of Scotland, a religious establishment which had been an incalculable blessing to that country, but he afterwards left it, and during the last 20 years of his life held the office of deacon of an independent church in Hamilton, and deserved my lasting gratitude and homage for presenting me from infancy with a continuous, consistent, pious example, such as that of the ideal of which so beautifully and truthfully portrayed in Burns' Cotter's Saturday Night. But the returns from his business were so small that he found it necessary to send his children to work in the factory, even before they had finished their meager course of education at the parish school. The mother of David Livingstone was a woman of great charm and force of character, a delicate little woman with a wonderful flow of good spirits. In her, rare devotedness and sterling common sense were combined. She was the careful and thrifty housewife who had to make every sixpence go as far as possible, but she was remembered for her unfailing cheerfulness and serenity, and there was always something to be saved out of the meager income when the work of the Church of Christ needed extra support. Livingstone says of his mother that the earliest recollection of my mother recalls a picture so often seen among the Scottish poor, that of the anxious housewife striving to make ends meet. At the age of 10, I was put into the factory as a piecer to aid my earnings in lessening her anxiety. With a part of my first week's wages, I purchased rudiments of Latin and pursued the study of that language for many years afterwards, with unabated ardor, at an evening school, which met between the hours of 8 and 10. The dictionary part of my labors was followed up till 12 o'clock, or later, if my mother did not interfere by jumping up and snatching the books out of my hands. Livingstone had 4 siblings that survived infancy, his brothers John and Charles, and 2 sisters, Janet and Agnes, who were recorded as having never married. We will skim over them for now, but we'll touch on them and their relationship to David in a future work. So, as it has already been alluded to, at a very young age, David Livingstone went to work in a mill. Livingstone himself tells us that at the age of 10, he went to work as a piecer. He had to be at the mill at 6 in the morning, and his work lasted till 8 at night, with intervals for breakfast and dinner. Tired as he must have been, he went to an evening school, which met from 8 to 10. The schoolmaster was paid part of a salary by the company then owning the mills, and partly by fees, which were so moderate, Livingstone tells us, that all who wished for education could obtain it. He had learned to read in his own home, and he had also been so diligent a student at the Sunday school that his teacher gave him a New Testament for repeating the 119th Psalm, the whole of which feat he achieved with just 5 errors. At the time, he was only 9 years of age. Livingstone was a born naturalist, and despite his father's old-fashioned prejudices, he made himself a scientist at a very early age, searching old quarries for the shells and the limestone, scouring Clydeside for simples, and arranging the flora of the district in botanical order. These expeditions were often very prolonged and involved the endurance of fatigue and hunger, but the lad could not be discouraged. Unconsciously, he was bracing himself physically for the toils and tasks of after years. There's a fine story about the example he set for his native African escort, who on one occasion had been misguided enough to talk disrespectfully about his slim figure and shortness of stature. Thereupon, Livingstone took them along for 2 or 3 days at the top of their speed, till they cried out for mercy. He had not scoured Clydeside for simples for nothing. His fearlessness is well illustrated in his daring and reckless exploit of climbing the ruins of Bothwell Castle, so that he might carve his name higher than any other boy had carved his. There, too, was the childlike ambition, which remained with him to the end, to do something which nobody else could surpass. No one, he wrote at the very end of his life on his last expedition, will cut me out after this exploration is accomplished. Then, he adds finally, and may the good Lord of all help me to show myself one of his stout-hearted servants, an honor to my children, and perhaps to my country and race. The story of Livingstone is the story of one of God's stout-hearted servants. Now, all of Livingstone's childhood and remarkable achievements of his adult life would hold little significance were it not for the greater purpose that guided him. Here, in his own words, we see his personal testimony of coming to faith. Great pains have been taken by my parents to instill the doctrines of Christianity into my mind, and I had no difficulty in understanding the theory of our free salvation by the atonement of our Savior. But it was only about this time that I really began to feel the necessity and value of a personal application of the provisions of that atonement to my own case. The change was like what might be supposed would take place were it possible to cure a case of color blindness. The perfect freeness with which the pardon of all of our guilt is offered in God's book drew forth feelings of affectionate love to Him who bought us with His blood, and a sense of deep obligation to Him for His mercy has influenced, in some small measure, my conduct ever since. The days of David Livingstone's boyhood were great days for missions. The churches were everywhere awakened to their opportunity and responsibility. And you might say a new Act of the Apostles was being written. Letters from remote parts of the world where the ancient battle between Christ and heathenism were being fought out anew were eagerly read and deeply pondered. The romance and heroism of the majestic campaign captured and kindled both young and old. The year of Livingstone's birth was a year of singular triumph in the South Seas. It was the year when his great countryman, Robert Morrison, completed his translation of the New Testament into Chinese. When he was some 6 or 7 years old, another famous Scottish missionary, Robert Moffat, was settling on the Curraman. And Mrs. Moffat bore in her arms a baby girl, destined to become David Livingstone's wife. The life of Henry Martyn was a supreme call to consecration, while the stories of the heroes and heroines of the Moravian missions were almost as familiar in that humble Scottish home as the history of the Apostle Paul. This is only the beginning of Livingstone's story. In our next episode, we'll follow Livingstone into the next stage of his journey, his medical and theological studies, his call to missions, and the first steps that would carry him far from Scotland and deep into the heart of Africa. We don't want you to miss any of the videos in this series on David Livingstone, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think would enjoy learning more about the life of missionary David Livingstone.